Hey guys, I wanted to talk about the Pullman, Washington home invasion and how it pertained to Bryan Kohberger's case. And I remember right away, do you guys remember that before they even had a suspect in the Idaho 4 murder case, that there was this dog that was found skinned, and it was like, what, 8 days later? So this says it's November 21st, 2022 when this video was posted, and everybody was freaking out. They were like, this has to be connected somehow. And this little dog was found like with only fur on its head and paws, and everybody was like, okay, these cases have to be connected. They have to be. And before they even came out with a suspect, they said that these cases weren't linked at all, and they never found the person that did this. And it was just so bizarre because police just confirmed, like, the dog's killer was a human, but it wasn't linked. Which it seemed like, how could they not be linked? So this is where the dog was found, and this is the King Road home. So it's just 3 miles, and it was like 8 days apart. So it was just weird. And then there was this. Dead coyotes were left on the doorstep, on the doorsteps of a fraternity house and a sorority house. And this was posted February 15th, 2017, and then it was reposted May 14th, 2021. There was like blood found on the doorsteps, and it was just like gruesome and weird, and nobody was ever caught for it, and they didn't know who did it or why it happened, and it's just bizarre. And then here's the King Road home right here. That's the King Road home, and this is literally like blocks away, and nobody was caught for it, and it was just dead coyotes left at sorority houses and a fraternity house. And like I remember it was described, it was kind of like really gruesome and like disgusting. Like they were literally on the doorsteps of these 2 homes. And then you have the Pullman, Washington invasion. And it's kind of weird because like I can't find the full body camera. I tried finding the whole full body camera of this for like days, and unfortunately I can't pay to request to get the information because I don't make any money. But I noticed that like I can't find where the woman's describing what happened anywhere, like what the person looked like anywhere. I know they say that he's 5'3", 5'4", but I can only find that in the actual report.
Body camera footage obtained by ABC News shows police responding to an alleged home invasion 1 year before the murders, less than 10 miles from the off-campus home where 4 University of Idaho students were stabbed to death. The woman tells police it was about 3:30 a.m. when a masked intruder entered her bedroom in Pullman, Washington, holding a knife.
I heard my door open, and I looked over, and someone was wearing a ski mask and had a knife. And so I kicked it out of their stomach and screamed super loud, and they flew back into my closet and then ran out my door and up the stairs.
According to the police report, she said the suspect was silent the whole time, and while one of her roommates quickly called police, officers found no suspect or evidence. But according to the report, the woman described the Pullman suspect as 5'3" to 5'5". Kohberger is 6 feet tall. The report also reveals Kohberger, a Pennsylvania resident, was not yet enrolled at Washington State University, nor was he visiting the campus as a prospective graduate student. Pullman police tell ABC News Kohberger is no longer a person of interest in the break-in, adding, "We have no reason or evidence to believe he was involved in this burglary at this time. The case is now closed, but remains unsolved."
So it's just so weird that there's so much weird stuff going on in this small area. But I kind of understand it because I live in a small area too. And it seems like a lot of our crimes are tied to, like, a lot more people from out of town moving here. And then we actually have a university where there are 2 unsolved murders that are connected to the university in our town. And it's weird because it's like we live in a small area that, like, our biggest city is about 200,000 people. And we don't get weird crimes like this, but lately we've been getting a lot more just, like, bizarre cases that we never thought that we would hear around here. And there's quite a bit lately, and it's kind of getting a little crazy, like something that you would not expect. We even had one really high profile case where a Florida woman moved here and she ended up doing something extremely horrible to a longtime resident in this bigger town. And we just never heard anything like that. But we do have at least 2 unsolved murders that are connected to that university, and it's just weird. I think to prove this case, the prosecution has to have evidence of Kohberger stalking his victims, either through the internet or something else. Like, my theory is that, like, he was at home and he just, like, started looking through his phone and realized that Kaylee was at the house. And he kind of, like, hurried up and left the house and was like, oh, shit. Like, he left the house to go do what he did. And then he just, like, was like, oh, no, my phone's not turned off. And he had to turn it off. Like, he was rushed somehow. Like, there has to be something that probably shows that he was on the internet looking at their Instagram or social media before, like, right before he left. There has to be something that shows that he had a weird obsession with his victims and that he was kind of, like, researching the house or something like that. Anyway, I wanted to talk about this. I actually seen a case on that chapter that was so perfect for me to kind of, like, talk about this whole situation, where it shows how important DNA evidence is and how common these weirdos are.
On May 19th, 1996, Laura Winans and her girlfriend Julie Williams, they set out to Shenandoah to do a section hike, which on both them thought this is a perfect place for us to camp for the night. The very next day after the girls had been reported missing on June 1st, the same day Julie had been due to start her new job, park rangers instead made a discovery they'll likely have burned into their memories forever. Camping items were strewn about the place, and the tent was partially collapsed. Lolly's body was found inside the couple's tent. She'd been bound and gagged with duct tape and her thermal underwear. She was only partially dressed, and her throat had been cut. Around 40 feet away, down an embankment, they found Julie. She was similarly bound and gagged, and her throat had also been cut. Both girls had been zipped up completely in their sleeping bags. It was thought that Lolly had been killed first and fairly quickly when someone had arrived, and then Julie was taken away and sexually assaulted and then murdered herself. There was a little sign of a struggle around the place, but the park rangers did find a couple of things that seemed odd. It seemed like they were placed there. One had brought, and they also found a pair of gloves which appeared to have been left there by whoever had been there, as no foreign fingerprints were found at the scene either. So it seemed like some things had been left there, staged, deliberately placed there at the scene of the crime. They did manage to recover a hair, though, from some duct tape at the scene, and the hair didn't belong to Julie or Lolly, so they were, the authorities were fairly sure that whoever did this, it was their hair. In fact, it was even so weird that Lolly and Julie, where they'd been camping, was 250 yards off the trail, on a place that wasn't even on the map. So when the killer stumbled across them, and then with the items left, they began to think, was this like, a hate crime? Had they been targeted because they were lesbians? Lubricant was found at the scene, which they were also fairly sure that the girls hadn't brought with them. So with duct tape, a glove, a knife used to kill them, a sex toy and lubricant all brought there, they began thinking this killer has a murder kit. They had brought a murder kit with them specifically to... Had he been following them? Had he been tracking them? Was this a serial killer? This didn't seem like a spur-of-the-moment attack if they had brought a goddamn, tools with them.
So there's two separate crimes that happened at the Shenandoah National Park. And the first one was Laura and Julie's case. And it was believed that the perpetrator brought a murder kit with them, and some of the items were staged.
The investigation carried on quietly, with little being heard publicly until 6 years later. But then, get this, in 2002, the FBI not only announced that they had charged somebody, but they were going to seek the death penalty for the murder of Lolly and Julie. So obviously, if you're thinking, wow, they're going to seek the death penalty, folks? Whoa. Oh boy. They must have, proof beyond proof. The Fed zeroed in on 34, 28 years old at the time of the crime, Darrell David Rice. They said he was the man who had stalked the Appalachian Trail. In 2002, by the time the charges were announced, Rice was already in prison. In fact, it's what he was already in prison for that had put investigators in the Shenandoah double murder on his trail. 5 years earlier, 1 year after the Shenandoah double murder, Darrell Rice had tried to grab a cyclist in the Shenandoah National Park. This woman had been trail biking in the national park when she was suddenly accosted by Darrell Rice. He kept chasing her, and then when they got to the road, he got into his van and tried to run her down. This woman had accurately been able to, get his look, his license plate and all that stuff, and pretty soon Darrell was chased down and arrested for attempted abduction and attempted murder. And when they got to him in his van, what did they find? Tools! Yeah, they found arm restraints, leg restraints, a murder kit, maybe. Rice was eventually sentenced to 11 years in prison for attempted kidnapping. It was because of his history that investigators looked at him for Lolly and Julie's deaths. Apparently, their suspicion was based on jailhouse informants and otherwise largely circumstantial evidence. But the FBI also announced we found his hair at the scene, that hair on the duct tape. They said it was his hair before they even tested it. And guess what? It wasn't his hair. Despite testing the hair several times, they just had to be sure. They're like, test it again. In 2004, they had to, remove their charges. All the charges were dropped, without prejudice, though.
And then they have this guy, David Rice, who fits perfectly. He's in this area of the Shenandoah National Park. And he's captured while he's committing a crime where he's trying to kidnap a woman. And he ends up having these weird items, like a murder kit, on him. And the police think, okay, we got our guy. This has to be him. But then it turns out that his DNA doesn't match the DNA found on the duct tape. But his MO is pretty similar, except for that it seems like he's trying to kidnap and relocate somebody instead of stumbling upon the camp, like what happened in Julie and Laura's case. But he tried to kidnap somebody a year after these two ladies were murdered, and it was pretty much how could it not be this guy? And that's kind of the same with this Pullman, Washington home invasion. How could it not be the same person? But this case shows perfectly how many different weirdos are doing this in this area. So that's one, is David Rice.
Darrell Rice was by no means a nice guy. He was far from it. And he was later connected to another murder. That of Alicia Showalter Reynolds. Alicia Showalter Reynolds was found murdered in the Shenandoah National Park in March of 1996, less than an hour from where Julie and Lolly would be found 2 months later. Investigators had found Alicia's car, and with her car they had found a note indicating that something was wrong with the car. It was a note written by Alicia saying, oh hey, car's broken, gone to go get help. But when the investigators checked her car, it was perfectly fine. There was nothing wrong with her car. So what investigators were thinking is that she'd been driving somebody had flagged her down saying, oh, I see a problem with your car, there's sparks coming from it, or something wrong with your exhaust, whatever. They'd flagged her down, gotten her to stop, said, oh, your car's broken. Either you can walk, or I'll give you a ride. We'll go get help. And yeah, several other women had reported that somebody had done this to them. They had been driving along, this guy flagged them down saying, there's a problem with your car. They pull over, he comes up beside him and says, hey, I'll drive you to a payphone. Now, some of these women would say he drove them to the payphone and it was absolutely fine. He dropped them off there. They called for a mechanic to come. The mechanic then arrives though and says there's nothing wrong with your car. So the woman gets freaked out. Other women would say though he flew into a rage, when they tried to confront him about what was going on. And then of course, maybe there was other women we will never hear from at all, including Alicia Showalter Reynolds. So investigators began to think that maybe all those other incidents of him, this mystery man, flagging down women and then taking to a payphone were him like trialing it out, testing out his little game, his little gimmick, his ploy, building up until Alicia was his unlucky victim. Witnesses had said they had seen Alicia talking to a man on the side of the road. This man matched Daryl Rice's description. Now, though, I gotta say, Daryl Rice was never charged in the Alicia Showalter Reynolds case.
So then you have the Alicia Reynolds case, where this woman was found 2 months before Laura and Julie in the same area. And the MO was kind of really strange. You got this guy who's stopping people while they're driving and telling them that there's something wrong with their vehicles. And it's so strange. It's so specific, like Ted Bundy's original MO. It seems like this was his working MO because he had multiple women say that some guy stopped them and he ended up dropping them off and all this other stuff. So I'm not too positive that these two cases are connected.
A lot of circumstantial evidence connected evidence to the Alicia Showalter Reynolds case, just as it had with Daryl Rice. He was active and not far from where she was found, but she was also older than his usual victims and not really much was found there. So at this point, the police were really trying to connect Julie and Lolly's Shenandoah double murder to the Alicia Showalter Reynolds murder. They happened within an hour of each other, within 2 months of each other. Likely the same killer had done it. If evidence did Showalter, or Daryl Rice did Showalter, he likely did the other one. But other than that, they had no real suspects at all regarding Lolly and Julie's case. Like, if you're just looking at that separately, they had nothing to go on.
And then you have Richard Mark Evanitz, who was another person who was in this area, and he was looked at for Alicia and Julie and Laura's case. But his victims were younger, and his MO was just kind of kidnapping them from their front yard. And we know that this guy did what he most likely did what he's being accused of, because one of his victims escaped and said, yeah, dude, this is definitely the guy that did it. So that's a third person in this area.
It was in the summer of 2024 that the FBI came out with an announcement. They finally believed they knew the identity of the man who brutally murdered Lolly and Julie. His name was Walter Leo Jackson Sr., because he is dead. Finally, after all these decades, the police were able to identify him. He was a monster in the truest sense, and suddenly this entire case sort of makes sense with what was done at their campsite and to them. The earliest incident I could find he was involved in occurred during the summer of 1996 when Leo was 30 years old. This was in Ohio, and a woman was just walking down the street, walking home, alone. Leo pulls up beside her in his van. He asks her, "Can I give you a ride home?" He drove her to a secluded area and he brutally assaulted her, and he kicked her out of the van. She managed to go to the police. She managed to identify him. The police, they got evidence. They got evidence of the knife he had threatened her with, of restraints, all of these kind of things that were found in his van. They brought it to the prosecutors, who declined to press charges. And then guess what? Ladies and gentlemen, you won't believe it. 6 months later, he did it again. And both of those attacks occurred in 1996 after the double murder in the national park, which is kind of baffling as to he murdered Julie and Lolly, but didn't murder. I mean, it's a good thing he didn't, but he didn't, which is unusual for a serial predator like Leo Jackson. I can't imagine the double murders was that can't have been his first rodeo. He must have been building up to it. In 2011, he sexually assaulted another woman as she was walking home during the daytime, asking if she wanted a ride. And it was being arrested for this. He was linked to the 2 previous attacks in 1996.
So Julie and Laura's case is finally solved with DNA evidence, which shows how huge DNA evidence is. It's basically like, hey, your DNA is there, you did this. And it's Walter Leo Jackson's, who is just, it's sickening that he got away with 2 crimes of assaulting women, and then he actually got caught. And then his DNA was tested and they found his DNA at Laura and Julie's. It's just weird. So you have at least 3 people in this area that aren't connected at all who are doing crimes. And I know 2 of them were for sure 2 different people who were in that same area, and one of them wasn't even looked at until the DNA came across, and the other one fit the MO almost perfectly and was in the same area. Both Walter Leo Jackson and David Rice had like weird, creepy vans full of tools. So it's just like, ugh, like how is that even possible? But it is. Like, we have weird people in the same area doing weird stuff. So, but I was wondering, what do you guys think? Is, like, DNA evidence, like, the end-all, be-all? Or does it seem like it's kind of easy to plant DNA evidence? Because I would think, you'd almost think that a PhD student in criminology who wants to be a serial killer would plant DNA evidence. I think that there are a lot of people who do crimes like this who are so narcissistic that they're really blind to how easily they're gonna be caught. Like, some of the crimes that people try to do, it's like, well, there's no way that they watch true crime because they just bumbled that up. But this is a PhD student in criminology. Like, he knows more about true crime than most of us. I don't know. I still think he absolutely did it. I think he fits perfectly. I think he was more concerned with not being seen as a suspect than he ever was with what happens if I am seen as a suspect. Because I think he is kind of narcissistic and in a way where he probably has like a grandiose idea of himself. And it's going to be really, really, really interesting to see how everything plays out. Well, thank you for listening to me rant. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night, rest of your day, rest of your evening, great weekend, whenever you're watching this. Take care of yourself and the people around you, because this world is just horrendous. God, there's a lot of horrible things that happen on a daily basis.